I knocked on my son's door, but his wife whispered, "Don't tell him you're here." Her eyes flicked toward the staircase, and the way her voice cracked wasn't just secrecy, it was fear. I froze, my hand still resting on the doorframe, the familiar wooden grain under my palm suddenly feeling foreign, almost hostile. My son's house had always been a place I thought I belonged, yet in that moment I realized I was being treated like an intruder. The hallway smelled faintly of burnt toast, the kind that lingers long after breakfast, and underneath it I caught something sharper, metallic, like the scent of coins. My chest tightened. I glanced past her shoulder, and that's when I saw 2 glasses of whiskey on the table, only one half empty. It was barely past noon. The curtain was drawn halfway, leaving the living room cloaked in a dim, uneven light. I had given this boy my life, my best years, my sacrifices. I married a man who broke me in ways no one ever knew, just so my son could have stability, could study, could step into a future without hunger or shame. I worked late nights mopping school floors so he could wear clean shirts to class. I stitched his coats when money wasn't enough for new ones. And when he met her, his wife, I had breathed a sigh of relief. She was steady, kind, someone who laughed at his arrogance instead of feeding it. I had believed she would be his balance. But now she stood in front of me, lips trembling, whispering warnings, her body blocking my path like a guard at a threshold I was no longer welcome to cross. The shadow on the landing moved again, and I heard the creak of floorboards. My son's footsteps, heavy, deliberate, the same rhythm he had as a child when he was angry and stomping away from me. I stepped back instinctively, my pulse drumming in my ears. "What's happening here?" I whispered, but she shook her head sharply. That's when I saw it, the faint bruise along her wrist as her sleeve slipped down. A purple ring around delicate skin that no accident could explain. My throat burned with the force of words I wanted to scream, but years of swallowing my pain had trained me too well. I remembered the nights when I endured my husband's silence, the mornings when I hid the marks beneath long sleeves, telling neighbors I was just clumsy. I had sworn my son would never become that man. But now the evidence was right in front of me, in the eyes of the woman who should have been safe with him. I heard his voice from upstairs, loud, sharp, calling her name. She flinched like a child caught stealing, and in that instant everything shifted inside me. The years of endurance, of excuses, of protecting him from the consequences of his own choices, they collided into a cold, unshakable clarity. This was no longer about my pride or my denial. This was about her safety, about stopping a cycle I had pretended was broken. The sound of his steps grew closer, each one echoing off the walls, and I knew the moment of pretense was ending. He didn't know I was here, but he would soon. And when he saw me standing in that hallway, staring at his wife's bruises, he would realize the truth. His mother had finally opened her eyes. I didn't say a word when he turned the corner at the top of the stairs and saw me, only the smallest flinch in his jaw betraying surprise before the performance began. "Ma? You didn't say you were coming," he said too brightly, the whiskey on his breath reaching me before he did. And when he moved closer, his knuckles grazed the banister, and I saw the raw crescent on his right hand, a bite of skin taken out by something harder than regret. His wife shifted behind me, quiet as a prayer that isn't sure it will be answered, and I kept my eyes on his face because if I looked at her wrist again, I would ruin everything with rage. "I was in the neighborhood," I said, the old lie, and he laughed like he'd invented charm. The TV upstairs was stuck on a loop of a commercial, the same 5 seconds of music repeating like a warning siren, and in that rhythm he started his questions. Harmless on the surface. How was I? Had I eaten? Did I need water? While his eyes flicked to her, hard, telling her to smile, to swallow whatever truth had crept to the edge of the door when she whispered, "Don't tell him. I'll put the kettle on," she murmured, moving toward the kitchen, and he followed a step. So I took 2 steps forward and blocked the way, pretending to look at the family photo on the wall from Christmas 2 years ago, pretending I didn't see the small round dent in the drywall just above the light switch. "You're working too much," I said softly, and he snapped, "Someone has to." The mask slipping for a heartbeat, his voice low and mean. Then he laughed again, I'm kidding, Ma. Relax. And the rhythm in my chest changed because I remembered that exact pivot from his father. The joke that wasn't a joke. The apology delivered as ridicule so you doubted your own ears. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse. I asked for a glass of water, and when he turned his back, the kettle remained cold, and she used the moment to brush past me, her sleeve catching, exposing the bruise again. I met her eyes and nodded once, a small agreement. Not here, not now. She slipped her phone into my palm under the cover of the cabinet door, and I felt the device buzz twice. 2 screenshots arriving in the hidden album she'd named Lists, so he wouldn't open it. 1. A. Bank notification. Friday, 2:14 a.m. 780 cash withdrawal at an ATM 5 miles away. Sus a message from him at 2:37 a.m. If you call your mother again, I swear I'll make you sorry. This is my house. My gut turned to stone. He came back with the water as though he'd been born thoughtful, and I thanked him as though I'd been born gullible. Then said I needed the bathroom and let the tap run while I looked at the screenshots properly, saving them to my own cloud with the quick practiced movements every woman in my generation learned too late. I took a photo of the bruise on her wrist while she stood in the hallway pretending to fold a throw blanket, used the wall clock in the frame for a clean timestamp, used the kitchen calendar in the background, September 12th circled in red, to tie the day to the image. Back in the living room, he'd turned the TV off, silence falling in a heavy layer, and he began to talk about a work problem that sounded like a pretext for why he'd been short with her. The problem being clients who don't respect boundaries, and bosses who push too far. And as he said boundaries, he looked at her and I thought, I know exactly which boundaries you mean. I kept my voice low and pleasant and asked about the car payment I co-signed back in March when his overtime was cut. And he smiled thinly and said it was handled, and I said, strange. Because I got an email last night, autopay failed. Final notice. And in the pause, he blinked and recalculated me as a different opponent than the mother who used to cover his late fees quietly. Must be a glitch, he said, too fast, and my phone lit with a new notification from the lender that I had queued up for this visit. Delinquent, 17 days. And I didn't wave it in his face. I pocketed it like a knife I would use later. The doorbell rang. Deliveries always arrive at the worst possible time. And he went to the door with that tight, showy hospitality men perform when they want neighbors to believe everything inside is normal. And while he signed for a package, I walked to the base of the stairs and looked up into the dim hall. At the top, the guest room door was half closed, and hanging from the knob was her tote bag. The one she started taking to yoga but hadn't been to class in weeks. It was open an inch, and inside I saw a folded brochure from the Women's Resource Center, the corner of a safety plan poking out. Step 1. Copy of ID and birth certificate. Step 2. Extra phone charger. Step 3. Birth control. Step 4. Safe word with trusted person. Safe word. I looked down at her, and she caught my eye and said in the lightest possible tone, Could you check the laundry? I think the machine is done. And the word laundry fell into my ear like a key turning. I went to the laundry closet, opened the dryer, and found the small Ziploc under the lint catcher exactly where I would have hidden it at her age. Prepaid phone, flash drive, an envelope labeled insurance containing a printout of photos. I didn't open the envelope. I simply slipped the flash drive into my bra, where no son of mine would check, and came back with a pile of warm towels like an obedient fool. He had closed the door, delivery gone, and the version of him that tries to be charming was already fraying, his smile too tight, his questions too pointed. How long are you staying, Ma? Just a minute more, I said, and left at exactly 12:41 p.m., because times matter when you're about to call a lawyer. In the car I called Nora, the attorney who did my neighbor's protective order last year, and by 1:10 p.m. she had texted me a checklist, photographs with timestamps, medical documentation within 48 hours, threatening messages preserved, and a plan to serve an emergency order when he'd be easiest to catch at home. I drove straight to urgent care with her. She slid into my passenger seat like a woman stepping across a riverbed of knives, quiet, careful, ready to bleed if she slipped. and we told the nurse the truth. I watched the doctor's face shift from professional to grave when he saw the wrist and the faint thumb-shaped bruise on her upper arm. They wrote, "Contusion consistent with grip," took photos for the record, printed me a copy, and I paid cash because I didn't want a bill hitting his email. Outside, in the late afternoon sun that made everything look kinder than it was, I bought her a second charger and a cheap hoodie 2 sizes too big so she could hide anything new if it happened before we finished the plan. At 4:03 p.m., she forwarded me a voice memo he'd sent the week before. His tone low and measured. The way abusers learn to threaten without giving the law the sentence it needs. "Don't bring your mother into this. You know how bad it can get when you make me look weak?" And those words went into the file labeled consequences. We drove back as the streetlights clicked on one by one, and before I dropped her off, we agreed on the safe word written on the plan: laundry. And a simple script if he started again. She would call me and ask about bleach. I didn't sleep that night. I made lists. I printed duplicates. I placed the flash drive's contents on 2 clouds and 1 physical copy. Nora filed the emergency petition at 8:12 a.m. the next morning. And by noon, we had a hearing time on Monday, and a judge who, God bless her, took one look at the photos and signed a temporary order to be served as soon as we could locate him. The trick was to keep him predictable for 48 hours. His boss helped without knowing. An email. Mandatory team meeting Sunday 10 a.m. Attendance required. And his wife told me quietly that he never missed those meetings because they're how he shows he's still valuable. Sunday morning, I parked 3 houses down, coffee going cold in my hands, and watched him leave at 9:18 a.m. in the shirt I bought him last Christmas because he'd said no one remembered his size. At 9:26 a.m., I met the deputy at the corner with a copy of the order and the garage code she'd whispered to me, and we went through the steps like a recipe. His wife packed the essentials and the documents from the safe: marriage certificate, lease, insurance, while I took photos of the dent in the wall and the broken phone case in the trash with specks of blood still on the rubber edge. We changed the password on the Wi-Fi. We moved a spare key to the neighbor's hands. We set up location sharing on her prepaid. When his car pulled back into the driveway at 11:07 a.m., 2 minutes earlier than she expected, the deputy was already at the curb, and I was seated on the sofa with the envelope of papers in my lap. He opened the door, surprised to see me, then furious to see the uniform, and the deputy said his name and then, "You've been served," handing him the order he tried to refuse until the body camera captured the moment it touched his chest. He read the first line, "No contact, vacate the residence immediately," and looked at me like I had stolen his birthright. And for the first time since he was a little boy, I saw confusion instead of control on his face. He started to argue, tripped on his own lies. "It's not what it looks like. We were just arguing. She bruises easily." And the deputy, patient as a metronome, repeated, "Sir, collect what you need for 24 hours. You'll schedule a civil standby later for the rest." And the neighbor's curtains moved like the blinking eyes of a chorus. He pointed at me. "You did this," and I kept my voice level. "No. You did this when you forgot what kind of man you promised not to be." And he flinched as though the sentence had weight. He left with a backpack and a look that used to break me, but not today. The door closed. The lock turned. And in the quiet after, she sagged into a chair and covered her face. I didn't touch her. I sat across from her, steady, because steadiness is the gift women my age can finally give. I told her we weren't done. Monday's hearing would decide the longer order, and we would need his past to show its face. The old police call from July he'd talked his way out of. The neighbor's Ring camera from the night of the shouting. The bank withdrawals that lined up with his empty apologies. She nodded, eyes red. And I realized the next part of the plan was the hardest. I would have to testify against my own son and say the words out loud that would unmake the story I'd been telling myself for 29 years. The one where he was just stressed. Just tired, just drink heavy for a season. I brewed a pot of jasmine tea because she likes the smell. And as it filled the house, I wrote out my statement by hand. Dates, times, quotes, the dressed-up threats. And when my phone vibrated at 5:42 p.m. with his message, Tell her to open the door, followed by, "You're ruining everything." I took screenshots, sent them to Nora, and felt that strange, quiet pride I never expected to feel. The pride of finally being the kind of mother who protects the woman her son married, even if it means protecting her from him. I took screenshots, sent them to Nora, and felt that strange, quiet pride I never expected to feel. The pride of finally being the kind of mother who protects the woman her son married, even if it means protecting her from him. That night, I didn't sleep. The house felt too heavy with memories of my own past mistakes. So I sat at the kitchen table with the lamp burning low, writing lists like soldiers draw battle lines. By dawn, I had everything in order. The photos of her bruises with timestamps, the messages he sent in his own words, and the printouts Nora had emailed with instructions on how to prepare for an emergency hearing. My hands trembled as I slid each piece into a plain manila folder. Evidence, truth, and the end of my denial all pressed flat on paper. At 9 a.m. sharp, I drove her to urgent care, my heart pounding every time she shifted in the passenger seat, flinching whenever a truck passed too close. The doctor's face changed as soon as he saw the marks, his clinical detachment cracking into something human, and when he wrote "consistent with forceful grip," I knew we had something her husband's words could never erase. She thanked me in a whisper on the way out, her voice so faint it broke me more than a scream ever could. We bought coffee we didn't drink and sat in the car for nearly an hour, her clutching the cup like it was an anchor, me watching the clouds roll in over the parking lot, knowing storms were brewing in more places than the sky. By afternoon, Nora called with news. The judge had granted a temporary order, and it was just a matter of serving him. That word, serving, felt too polite for what it was. A wall being built between predator and prey, a line he would not be allowed to cross again without consequence. The problem was timing. He worked irregular hours, slipped in and out at odd times, and we needed him steady, predictable, catchable. His wife told me about his Sunday routine, how he never missed the weekly meeting at his job, how he left the house in the same shirt, carrying the same false confidence like armor. We formed the plan there in my car, scribbling steps on the back of a receipt. She would pack essentials and documents while he was gone. I would bring the deputy to serve him the moment he returned, and we would stand together when the law told him to leave. The next 2 days felt like walking on glass. He paced the house at night, slamming doors, muttering to himself, demanding to know why she was so quiet, why she kept looking at her phone. She hid her fear with a silence I recognized too well. It was the same silence I used to wear when his father prowled through our old kitchen. But this time, I was not going to look away. On Sunday morning, I parked 3 houses down, watching through the windshield as he stepped out at exactly 9:15, car keys jangling, a coffee thermos in his hand. My pulse steadied. The deputy texted me, "Ready." We had one chance, and I was not going to waste it. I stepped out of my car, folder pressed tight under my arm, and walked toward the deputy's vehicle as if I'd been rehearsing this moment all my life. The air was crisp, the kind that bites your lungs awake, and every sound seemed sharpened. The caw of a crow on a wire, the hollow thud of a basketball from a neighbor's driveway, even the crunch of gravel under my shoes. When his car disappeared down the street, my son's wife opened the door a crack, her face pale but determined. She carried 2 bags, one with clothes, one with documents, and her eyes flicked behind her like a hunted animal's. I ushered her out quickly, loading the bags into my trunk while the deputy went inside with me to take photos of the holes in the drywall, the broken lamp shoved behind the couch, the receipts on the counter that matched the cash withdrawals at 2 a.m. He logged everything, his body camera capturing details I prayed would matter to the judge. By 10 a.m., we had what we needed and slipped out before the meeting ended. She sat in my living room the rest of the morning, clutching the spare phone like it was a lifeline, and I brewed tea neither of us touched. At 11:07 a.m., his car pulled into the driveway, earlier than expected. My stomach turned to ice. The deputy pulled up right behind him, lights off but presence undeniable. My son walked to the front door, juggling his keys, humming under his breath like nothing in the world could touch him. But when he opened the door and saw me seated on the sofa, the deputy standing at his shoulder, his smile froze. "What's going on?" he demanded, the question more bark than curiosity. The deputy held out the papers, voice steady. "You've been served." My son refused to take them at first, sneering, "This is a joke." But the deputy touched the order to his chest, and the body cam blinked green, marking the moment official. His wife stayed in the kitchen doorway, her hands shaking as she clutched her hoodie closed. His eyes shot to her, dark with betrayal, then back to me, and in that silence stretched across the room, I realized he understood for the first time. His mother had not come to save him, but to save her. His face twisted, first with confusion, then with the kind of anger that no longer hides behind charm. "You?" he spat, pointing at me as if I were the enemy who had stormed his castle. "You did this?" I didn't move, didn't blink. "No," I said evenly, my voice steady like a stone in water. "You did this to yourself." He laughed, sharp and ugly, then turned on his wife. "You put her up to this? After everything I've done for you? You run to my mother?" His words cracked like a whip and she flinched, but the deputy raised a hand calmly. "Sir, collect what you need for 24 hours. The rest can be retrieved later with a civil standby." My son's jaw worked as if grinding bone, but he stomped upstairs, muttering curses, his footsteps shaking the ceiling. Every slam of a drawer was another nail in the coffin of the boy I had raised. I sat there in the silence, hearing him throw things into a bag, hearing the old echo of my past when his father used to pack with the same fury, threatening to leave but never truly going anywhere. Only this time he would leave, by law, by force if needed. When he came back down, backpack slung over one shoulder, he stared at me with eyes that once begged me to tie his shoes, eyes that once lit up when I clapped for him at his school play. Now they were cold, empty, filled only with blame. "You'll regret this," he hissed, and for a moment I saw the boy and the man blur into one creature I no longer recognized. The deputy opened the door, and the neighborhood was suddenly alive, curtains twitching, phones recording, whispers carried on the wind. My son stepped outside, the order still in his hand, and I felt a strange calm wash over me, as if the weight of decades had shifted off my shoulders at last. His wife collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands, sobbing silently into her sleeves. I didn't comfort her, not yet. Instead, I went to the table, pulled out the manila folder, and began to sort what was next. Monday's hearing, the testimonies, the evidence lined up like soldiers on the battlefield. She looked up, her face blotchy but her eyes clear, and whispered, "He's going to hate you forever." I nodded. "He already does, but that doesn't matter. What matters is, he won't touch you again." We spent the afternoon preparing in quiet partnership. I printed out duplicates of every photo, every message, every receipt. She forwarded me recordings she had kept hidden for months, his voice low and menacing, threats masked as jokes, cruel words about how no one would ever believe her. Together, we arranged it all in order, building a timeline so solid no judge could ignore it. By evening, Nora came by, her presence brisk and reassuring. She flipped through the evidence, nodding, then told us plainly, "You've done everything right. Tomorrow we stand in front of the judge and let the facts speak." I slept only in fragments that night, the silence broken by my own heartbeat and the echo of his last words. "You'll regret this." But regret was behind me now. The next morning, as we walked into the courthouse, the air smelled of disinfectant and paper, the sound of footsteps and murmured voices bouncing off the marble walls. We sat together on a hard wooden bench, two women bound by fear and determination, waiting for the doors to open. When they finally did, we stepped into the courtroom, and my son was already there, sitting stiff, his lawyer whispering in his ear. He didn't look at me, not once. He only stared straight ahead, jaw tight, pretending he wasn't afraid. But I knew. I knew because for the first time in his life, the consequences were not negotiable. And his mother wasn't on his side to shield him. The judge called our case, And as we rose, my knees trembled, but my resolve did not. I had spent decades silencing myself, but not today. His lawyer spoke first, painting him as stressed, misunderstood, a hard-working man unfairly accused by an emotional wife and a meddling mother. The words slithered through the room, but I watched the judge's eyes. They did not soften. When Nora stood, her voice was crisp and cutting, laying out each piece of evidence like cards in a game he could no longer control. She showed the bruises with timestamps, the urgent care report signed by the doctor, the bank withdrawals lined up with nights of shouting, the text messages dripping with threats. Then she called me forward. I walked to the stand, folder in hand, and placed it down with a weight that felt heavier than any burden I had ever carried. I spoke the truth, every line, every bruise I had seen, every whisper his wife had given me. I admitted my shame, how I had ignored the patterns repeating, how I had once thought silence was protection. But silence, I said, my voice steady though my throat burned, was permission. And I will not give permission anymore. My son shifted in his seat, his face red, fists clenched. She's lying. He burst out, the words echoing across the quiet room, but the judge lifted a hand. Sit down. And in that sharp command, I saw my son deflate like a balloon punctured. His wife then took the stand, voice trembling but words strong, describing the nights when the shouting turned to bruises, when the laughter turned to threats. She played a recording, his voice snarling, "Don't bring your mother into this. You know how bad it can get." The courtroom went silent except for that voice, his own weapon turned against him. He dropped his head into his hands, and for the first time I saw a flicker of fear where arrogance once lived. The judge's ruling came swift. The protective order was extended for a full year, no contact permitted, mandatory counseling, and his removal from the house effective immediately. He slammed his fist on the table, shouting that this was a setup, that family betrays family, but the bailiff was already moving toward him, and the judge's gavel cut through his noise. I looked at him one last time as he was let out, his eyes full of hatred and disbelief. But mine? Mine were calm, steady, and unflinching. Outside the courthouse, the sun was bright, almost mocking in its warmth. His wife leaned against the wall, her breath shaky but her smile small and real, the kind of smile that belongs to someone who can finally breathe again. Reporters lingered nearby, murmuring, and neighbors who had come to watch whispered as we passed. I did not care. I had spent too many years caring about appearances. Now I cared only about truth, and about the line I had finally drawn in the sand. That night, she stayed at my house, curled on the couch with a blanket I had knitted years ago, back when I still believed love was enough to fix men like him. I sat in the armchair across from her, watching her chest rise and fall as she slept, and for the first time in decades, the house felt safe. My phone buzzed once, his number, unsaved but unmistakable, but I let it ring until it went silent. I knew the voicemail would be filled with curses or pleas, but I no longer needed to hear either. Tomorrow would bring lawyers, paperwork, perhaps even his rage spilling out into the world. But tonight, in the stillness of my living room, I let myself feel the quiet victory of choosing her safety over his temper, of choosing truth over denial, of choosing to be the kind of mother who breaks the chain instead of passing it down. Tomorrow would bring lawyers, paperwork, perhaps even his rage spilling out into the world. But tonight, in the stillness of my living room, I let myself feel the quiet victory of choosing her safety over his temper, of choosing truth over denial, of choosing to be the kind of mother who breaks the chain instead of passing it down. The next morning, his retaliation began. Not with fists, but with words, the kind that travel through phones and neighbors' mouths. He called relatives, spinning the story that I had betrayed him, that his wife was hysterical, that I was old and confused and manipulated. One cousin texted me, "How could you do this to your own blood?" Another left a voicemail telling me family business should stay inside family walls. I deleted each one without replying. I had heard those same lines decades ago, when his father's temper flared and everyone said I should keep quiet for the sake of appearances. This time, I refused to swallow the poison. His wife sat at my kitchen table, scrolling through the messages flooding her phone. Half threats, half pity. "They'll never believe me," she whispered. I took her hand. "They don't have to. The judge already does." Still, the fallout came in waves. His boss called, saying he had missed work, that rumors were spreading. Old friends of his began posting cryptic lines on social media about loyalty and betrayal. He was painting himself as the victim, and the community, hungry for gossip, lapped it up. But beneath the noise, the law was steady. The protective order stood, the court dates loomed, and each piece of evidence we had gathered was another anchor tying him to his actions. One evening, a police officer came by to confirm he had tried to contact her again, violating the order. She showed them the string of missed calls and one voicemail where his voice cracked with fury. "You'll regret this." "Both of you." The officer logged it, his expression grim. "Every violation strengthens your case," he told her. I watched her shoulders straighten a little at those words, as if for the first time in months she felt the weight wasn't hers to carry alone. At night, though, fear still lived in her eyes. She jumped at every sound, every car pulling up outside. I taught her the little tricks I had once used myself, placing bells on doors, keeping a flashlight and phone charger by the bed, memorizing escape routes. It hurt to pass down survival lessons, but at least this time they were weapons, not secrets. Days blurred into weeks, and slowly the balance shifted. His absence grew longer, his anger more desperate, his control slipping like sand through clenched fists. He began missing court dates, dodging calls from his own lawyer. The cracks in his armor widened, and we documented everyone. Through it all, I remained steady. Not because I was unafraid, but because I had learned long ago that fear loses its teeth when you stand firm in the light. One evening, she said to me softly, "You saved me." I shook my head. "No, you saved yourself. I just refused to look away this time. I just refused to look away this time." The words hung in the air between us, heavier than any silence we had shared before. And I knew she believed me because her eyes softened for the first time since I had stepped into that house weeks ago. But outside, the storm kept gathering. My son's attempts to intimidate grew bolder. He parked his car at the end of my street late at night, headlights cutting through my curtains like a spotlight, engine idling until the fuel gauge forced him to leave. Once, he left a folded note under my wipers, blank, except for one sentence scrawled across the bottom. "You're not done with me." I didn't crumble. Instead, I took photos, logged the time, handed it all to Nora, who added it to the growing pile of violations. The judge extended the order again, this time with sharper teeth. No entry within 200 yards of either of us, mandatory check-ins with law enforcement, the threat of jail for further defiance. He snarled in the courtroom, his voice echoing against the walls, "You can't erase me from my own life." But he was already being erased by his own hands, each reckless choice another stroke of ink sealing his fate. His wife, no, I should call her what she had become in truth, my daughter by survival, found her footing slowly. She enrolled in night classes, updated her resume, began driving herself again without the shadow of his voice dictating when she could leave or return. I watched her shoulders square a little more each day, and pride, bittersweet and fierce, swelled in me. Meanwhile, I prepared for the worst. I reinforced the locks, spoke with neighbors I trusted, and kept the deputy's number on speed dial. But the worst never came in fists or flames. It came in the unraveling of his own life. His employer, tired of excuses, suspended him. Creditors called, debts piled high, and his social mask slipped in front of those who once believed his charm. The man who thought he was untouchable was suddenly cornered by his own lies. One evening, as she and I folded laundry together in the quiet rhythm of ordinary life, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "She'll come back. You'll see. You can't keep her forever." I showed it to her, and instead of shrinking, she laughed. a sound light and free, the sound of someone who has stepped out of a cage and finally knows the lock is broken. That laugh carried me through. The night, steadier than any weapon, stronger than any order on paper, because it meant he was losing the one thing he had thrived on. Her fear. That laugh carried me through the night, steadier than any weapon, stronger than any order on paper, because it meant he was losing the one thing he had thrived on. Her fear. Still, battles like these never end in silence. They end in spectacle. And sure enough, the spectacle came on a gray Monday morning when we walked into court for the violation hearing. He was already there, slouched at the defense table, his shirt wrinkled, eyes bloodshot, hair unwashed but his smirk intact. He whispered something to his lawyer and then leaned back as if to show the whole room he wasn't afraid. But fear leaks through in strange ways. The tapping of a foot that won't stop, the constant glance at the clock, the way his knuckles whiten around a pen until it snaps. The prosecutor presented everything: photos of him parked on my street, the voicemail where his voice cracked with rage, the note under my wipers, even the neighbor's statement that they had seen him pacing outside our house after midnight. Piece by piece, the portrait built itself, and for once I didn't need to defend what was obvious. He tried to object, interrupting with scoffs and muttered insults, but the judge shut him down, warning him once, then twice. On the third outburst, a bailiff stepped closer, and I watched his bravado falter. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I looked straight at him and said, "I am not here to destroy you. I am here to protect her. And if that means standing against you, I will. Because you are not the boy I raised anymore. You are the man who chose this path." His mouth opened, but no words came out. For a moment, silence crushed the room, and I could feel every woman watching, wives, mothers, daughters, holding their breath with me. The judge's decision came swift and heavy. 90 days in county jail for repeated violations, mandatory counseling, and a review hearing at the end of the term. The gavel struck, and just like that, the chain I had carried for decades snapped. They led him out, his head down, shackles clinking softly, and in that sound I heard both an ending and a beginning. His wife gripped my hand, whispering, "It's over," but I knew better. Nothing ever ends so clean. There would be paperwork, appeals, angry relatives, whispers in the grocery store aisles. But for the first time, the danger wasn't sitting in our living room. It was locked away, contained by walls thicker than our fear. That evening, we drove home in silence, the sky painted with streaks of orange and purple. When we pulled into my driveway, she turned to me and said, "I want to start over, not just survive, live." Her eyes glowed with a determination I recognized from the girl she once was, long before him. And I realized that this wasn't just my story of breaking free. It was hers too. Together, we carried the groceries inside, ordinary bags of bread and milk and apples, and the normalcy of it nearly broke me. For years, I had prayed for peace. And here it was, wrapped not in grand gestures but in the simple act of coming home without fear. For years, I had prayed for peace, and here it was, wrapped not in grand gestures but in the simple act of coming home without fear. But peace is fragile when the world has learned to measure you by how much pain you can endure. In the weeks that followed his sentencing, the backlash came sharp and steady. His relatives called me Judas, whispered that I had poisoned my own blood. One of his aunts cornered me at the market, hissing through her teeth, "Mothers don't do this. Mothers forgive." I looked her in the eye and said, "Mothers protect." She recoiled as if struck, and for the first time, I didn't flinch under the weight of their judgment. His wife, no, my daughter in every way that mattered now, struggled with guilt that wasn't hers to carry. She asked me once late, at night, "What if he changes in there? What if he comes out different?" I held her hand and told her the truth. Change is his to choose. Safety is ours to keep. And slowly, she began to believe it. We filled our days with things that once seemed impossible. She enrolled in college classes. I tended the garden without glancing over my shoulder every 5 minutes. We cooked dinners that ended in laughter instead of tense silence. Yet shadows lingered. Letters began arriving, some from him, some from his friends, pleas, threats, twisted apologies. We handed them all to Nora, who filed them neatly into the ever-growing case. Each word he wrote only built the wall higher between us. One letter, though, I read twice. You were supposed to be my safe place. You were supposed to defend me. Instead, you chose her. You'll regret this until your last breath. I folded it slowly, slid it back into the envelope, and realized something sharp and clear. He was right about one thing. I had been his safe place. I had built walls around him, excused his temper, shielded him from consequence. And in doing so, I had betrayed her long before he ever raised his hand. My regret wasn't in choosing her now. It was in not choosing her sooner. The realization cut deep, but it also healed. It meant I could stop carrying the lie that motherhood meant covering sins. It meant I could start over, too. The day of the review hearing arrived months later, and when he walked in wearing county blues, thinner, eyes darker, I searched for the boy I had raised and found nothing left. His lawyer begged for leniency, said he was ready to change, but the stack of violations, the letters, the threats told another story. His wife took the stand one last time and said, voice steady as stone, I am not afraid of him anymore, but I am afraid of what he'll do if you let him back into our lives. The judge listened, nodded, and extended the order for another year. My son looked at me then, searching for something. Mercy, maybe. Or the old version of me who would have stepped in to save him. But that woman was gone. I met his gaze and said nothing. Silence this time was not permission. It was the end. When we walked out of the courthouse into the crisp winter air, she slipped her arm through mine and whispered, We're free. And for the first time, I believed it. When we walked out of the courthouse into the crisp winter air, she slipped her arm through mine and whispered, We're free. And for the first time, I believed it. But freedom has its own cost, and I felt it every time the phone rang with an unknown number, every time a car slowed a little too long in front of my house. We learned to live with vigilance, not fear. I showed her how to notice details, license plates, the weight of footsteps, the way voices carry through walls. It wasn't paranoia. It was survival sharpened into instinct. At night, we sat together, drinking tea and sorting through her new class assignments, while I paid bills and balanced my modest pension. Life was ordinary, and in that ordinariness lay our greatest victory. Still, he found ways to reach from the shadows. A cousin of his posted photos online, mocking us, calling her a liar, calling me a traitor. People whispered at church, some turning their backs, some offering quiet support with a squeeze of the hand. I realized then how cycles survive, not just through the abuser, but through the silence of those who'd rather not see. And I refused to let silence win again. I began speaking at the Women's Center, sharing our story not as gossip but as warning, teaching others how to gather evidence, how to trust their instincts, how to build a plan brick by brick until it became unbreakable. She came with me sometimes, standing in the back at first, then slowly moving forward, until one evening she spoke too, her voice trembling at the start, then growing steadier as she told the room, I thought no one would believe me, but someone did, and that saved my life. The applause that followed wasn't just for her, it was for every woman who had sat in the shadows and finally stepped into the light. Months passed, seasons turned, and the hold he had on our lives loosened like rusted chains snapping one by one. He tried once more, writing a long letter to me, begging this time instead of threatening. Ma, I've changed. I'm ready to come home. I need you. Don't leave me alone in this world. I read it once, folded it carefully, and tucked it into the same drawer where I kept the photos of her bruises. Because change isn't proven by words scrawled in desperation. It's proven by actions, and his actions had spoken loud enough. I didn't respond. That silence wasn't weakness. It was strength. It was the final boundary. And as spring came, I planted new flowers in the garden, bright tulips, yellow daffodils, purple hyacinths, colors that had been missing from my life for too long. She helped me, hands covered in soil, laughter spilling into the air. No longer the laughter of defiance, but of true release. That day I understood something I had never allowed myself to believe. Endings can also be beginnings. I wasn't just a mother who had finally opened her eyes. I was a woman who had finally claimed her own life. That day I understood something I had never allowed myself to believe. Endings can also be beginnings. I wasn't just a mother who had finally opened her eyes. I was a woman who had finally claimed her own life. And yet, even as we planted tulips and laughed in the sun, I knew storms leave behind debris. His absence created space, but also echoes of doubt, of the old habit of checking doors twice, of jumping when the phone rang. One evening, weeks later, I noticed her sitting on the porch, staring out at the quiet street with that faraway look survivors carry. I sat beside her and waited. After a while, she said, "Do you ever feel guilty for not seeing it sooner?" Her voice cracked like thin glass. I swallowed hard. Every day. I should have noticed the way he spoke to you, the way you shrank. I should have remembered what it meant when laughter hides fear. She nodded, tears welling up. But then she took a deep breath and whispered, "You saved me anyway. Even if it was late, you saved me." I reached for her hand, rough with new calluses from working again, and I realized healing doesn't erase scars. It just means they don't control you anymore. That summer, she found her first real job, working at the library in town. I walked with her on her first day, proud the way mothers are. And when she disappeared through the glass doors, head high, I felt a quiet triumph bloom in my chest. He tried once more to reach us through a mutual friend who knocked on my door with a folded note. He says he's sorry. He wants to talk? I shook my head and handed it back. Tell him we don't need words. We need distance. The friend sighed, muttered something about family bonds, but I closed the door without another word. Because family without respect is just a chain, and I had finally broken mine. The more distance we built, the clearer life became. She started cooking again, filling the house with scents of cinnamon bread and roasted chicken, and the sound of her humming drifted through the rooms. Sometimes, late at night, I caught myself smiling at the simplest things. Her shoes by the door, the stack of books on the table, the way she laughed at bad television. Ordinary things. The kind of ordinary I once thought was impossible. And in those moments, I knew. The true revenge wasn't in the courtroom, or in the sentence, or in the shame he now carried. The true revenge was in living well without him, in proving that we could build joy from the ruins he left behind. The true revenge was in living well without him, in proving that we could build joy from the ruins he left behind. Still, healing is not a straight path. It twists and circles back, testing the strength of every step. Months passed, and though the house was peaceful, there were nights when I heard her cry softly in the guest room, muffling the sound with a pillow. I didn't rush in. I knew some grief belongs to silence, and some strength is forged in letting yourself feel the pain instead of hiding it. But in the morning, she always emerged with puffy eyes and a steadier heart, and that was enough. We learned to live as two women who had carried too much and survived anyway. Our bond deepened not through blood, but through choice. She started calling me Mom without hesitation, and each time it pierced me with equal parts sorrow and pride. Sorrow that my son had lost that right, pride that she had given it to me freely. By autumn, the leaves outside blazed gold and crimson, and we walked together through the park like any ordinary family. Children laughed on the swings. Couples strolled with ice cream cones, and for once I felt we weren't outsiders watching the world. We were part of it again. But then, just as the world began to settle, the storm threatened to return. A letter arrived, this time official, his lawyer requesting visitation. claiming he deserved a chance to rebuild family ties. My stomach clenched, old fear rising, but when I showed it to her, she didn't shake, didn't cry. She took the paper, read it slowly, and said, "Let him try. I'm not afraid anymore." We went back to Nora, who assured us the protective order still stood, and reminded us that every violation only buried him deeper. "This is desperation," she said firmly. "It won't stand," and she was right. The judge dismissed the request in minutes, unimpressed by his theatrics, unmoved by his pleas. Watching from the gallery, I saw him glance back at me, eyes hollow, his smirk gone. It was not victory I felt, it was closure. Not because the law had spoken, but because his power over us was finally broken, shattered beyond repair. That night, she cooked a celebratory dinner. Simple pasta, garlic bread, a bottle of cheap wine. We sat at the table together, laughing until our stomachs hurt, retelling small stories that had nothing to do with him. I realized then that freedom doesn't come all at once. It comes in pieces, in laughter, in the taste of garlic bread, in the sound of someone calling you mom with love instead of obligation. When we cleared the dishes, she hugged me tight and whispered, "Thank you for never looking away again." I held her, my eyes wet, and thought, maybe this is what motherhood was always supposed to mean. Not protecting your child from consequences, but protecting the innocent from being destroyed by them. Maybe this is what motherhood was always supposed to mean. Not protecting your child from consequences, but protecting the innocent from being destroyed by them. In the quiet months that followed, life stitched itself back together, not in grand, perfect patterns, but in small, imperfect threads. She moved into her own apartment across town, a modest place with peeling paint and creaky floors, but she decorated it with plants and books, laughter and music. I visited often, carrying casseroles like any mother would, and each time I left, I felt the weight on my chest grow lighter. She was no longer just surviving, she was living. As for my son, the updates trickled in through the grapevine of relatives who couldn't resist sharing. He lost his job permanently, bounced from one friend's couch to another, avoided every court-ordered counseling session until the judge issued another warrant. Some told me I should pity him. Some said I should welcome him back, forgive, be a real mother. But what they never understood, and what I finally did, was that forgiveness without change is just permission for the cycle to continue. And I would not hand him that permission again. My revenge was never to destroy him. My revenge was to build a world where his shadow no longer reached us. And that's exactly what I did. I found peace in the sound of my garden in bloom, in the sight of her laughing freely, in the simple truth that safety had returned to a home where fear once ruled. I am not blind to what I lost. I lost the boy I once raised, the dream of who he could have been, the illusion that love alone could save him. But I gained something far greater, the strength to say enough, the courage to act, the knowledge that cycles can be broken if someone dares to open their eyes. And if I had to choose again, I would choose the same. Because she is worth it. Because I am worth it. Because silence is no longer my inheritance to give. So here I am, telling this story, not for pity, not for praise, but as a reminder. Sometimes revenge is not fire or fury. Sometimes it is simply survival turned into freedom, pain turned into protection, loss turned into love. And now I want to ask you, what would you have done in my place? Would you have stood against your own child to save someone else? Tell me in the comments, and let me know where in the world you're listening from, because stories like mine shouldn't stay hidden in whispers. They should be carried far, so no woman ever has to feel alone in her fight again. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it touched you, if it made you think, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support means more than you know. Share in the comments what you would have done in my place, and tell me where in the world you're listening from. And remember, you're never alone in your fight. This was Twisted Voices, and we'll meet again in the next story.